Good morning, campers, and welcome to Radio Camp Half-Blood, a Percy Jackson read-along podcast. I'm B,
And I'm Zach.
and this week we read Chapter 3 of The Battle of the Labyrinth. We play tag with scorpions.
You know, it's always a hard thing to do with playing tag with scorpions because they're just like goth lobsters that just want to give you kisses, and it sucks.
With tail kisses with their pointy stinger and their spooky pinchers.
Here I am just thinking about like biology, and it's like, you know what? Lobsters like, let's tap out a little bit. Let's become like super nightmare and like we'll just murder you, which I have never seen a scorpion in my life, but I would imagine I would just run the other way. Like, honestly, I would take my chances with a rattlesnake before I take my chances with a scorpion.
Yeah, something about them, like, having an exoskeleton is really upsetting to me. Yeah. When you think about it, I mean, lobsters really aren't too dissimilar from scorpions, but for some reason we eat those. It's kind of a cognitive dissonance that I don't fully understand.
People also eat scorpions too. Like, I've gone to like flea markets and I've gone to county fairs where they have like scorpions on pizzas and they have like scorpions in candy.
Yeah, they put them in lollipops and stuff.
Come to think of it, we've kind of domesticated the scorpion in a terrible way.
I don't think domesticated is the word you're looking for when you put something in a lollipop. I think I don't know what the word for that is exactly. Raised them for slaughter.
I'm just thinking like domesticating a scorpion, like you put like a little leash on it and you like walk it around town.
Yeah, that's like a level of eccentric that I hope I never reach.
The crazy I want to be is kind of like being able to walk my pet peacock around.
See, a peacock is different though.
Oh yeah, it isn't a scorpion unless they have scorpion peacocks.
Anyway, the scorpions in this are much larger too. So before we started recording, you mentioned how you thought this chapter was kind of boring.
Oh yeah, I was kind of like reading it and I was kind of like glossing over things, which I don't normally ever do really. And then once it got to the more interesting parts, like near the end of the chapter, like, okay, I can be invested in this, which is a weird thing.
So was it the scorpions you didn't find interesting?
No, it wasn't the scorpions. It was just the beginning of this chapter just seems very routine. Like opening up, it just feels like, you know, we're going into the minutia of the last four books of just like, oh no, we go to the first day of camp. There were kind of some problems that were happening. Oh no, there's this bigger plot that's going to be happening. Like within like the first three chapters, like the plot has to go pretty much full circle to like doomsday levels.
Right. You also need to establish the quest. That's sort of the pattern we've been following since the beginning, really, is usually by the third chapter, we're kind of finding out what the general quest is going to be for Percy and his friends.
Even in like, I keep comparing to the Titan's Curse. With that one, it took like a little more chapters for the quest to really begin, which I really did enjoy, where, you know, you have the beginning where they go on that mission, and then they'll have the whole setup of getting towards the camp with going with Apollo, and that's all fun.
Right, yeah. We talked about that last episode, how that sort of breaks with the pattern a little bit. Well, this is like pretty straightforward. They're at summer camp again. And then there's obviously the plot stuff that's going on in the background continuously, which all has to do with Luke and the Princess Andromeda and the spooky sarcophagus filled with Kronos's
evil bits
animating body. Yeah.
We have Mama Kronos's evil bits back from the old country.
The old country of Greece.
But to say that I hated this chapter, I didn't, because there's a lot of parts that I did enjoy about it. I just found it to be a little lackluster. That's the best word to use.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I kind of predicted that, because I remember last chapter when we read the chapter title, I knew it was going to be this whole thing with Quintus and his monsters that he, I don't know, got off the black market. I don't exactly understand where he got boxes of giant scorpions, but there they were.
Yes, black market scorpions. That's what I think about when I go to the black market.
Yeah. It definitely has I think we've talked about this already, we got a new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, and he's spooky in this way. He's obsessed with all these scary animals that he can procure through dubious means.
Oh, so he's pretty much like, by proxy, he's being like Lupin in Harry Potter?
Yeah, he is, for sure. I knew that it was going to be one of those events that the campers have to go through kind of thing, like whether it be a chariot race or a capture the flag thing. Like there's a lot of these scenes in these books, and I never find them all that interesting other than the exposition that happens to come out of them at the same time. Like the only reason that this gets interesting is because then, well, we'll talk about it, but then they discover other stuff about the labyrinth and the quest that they want to go on to help, well, a lot of people that want to help Grover, they want to figure out what's going on with Luke. There's a lot of reasons why they want to figure out this stuff about the labyrinth, but that is when it gets interesting, like you said, like towards the end of the chapter. But all of the lead up of like, I mean, it's sort of like just like a premise that's made up to get us to the point where we find out about the labyrinth.
Once again, this is where I believe that Rick Riordan is an outliner, because you can see the not the problems, but like in a typical like person that is, I like to use like George R. R. Martin's philosophy of there's like gardeners, which are like people that just start writing and they'll figure it later on, and then there's people that are architects, which, you know, they build the world and have exciting bits. Obviously, Rick Riordan's an architect here, and you can see the like the differences. Like he has to set up these things because it's almost like formulaic, which not necessarily is a bad thing. I'll just stress that enough, that it isn't a bad thing to have this, but like when you're reading at, I guess, our slow pace, you can notice it very blatantly. But also to a kid, you're like plowing through the book, like you will not notice this whatsoever. This is just the criticism from just being so slow.
If you analyze it to pieces, you do definitely see like the scaffolding of the plot, sort of like, oh, I get why he's doing this because this is how the plot moves forward. But it does become very like rote. It's kind of like what you were getting at before we started recording. Like, oh yeah, this is exactly the pattern.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain as Rick Riordan's like pulling levers and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like real Wizard of Oz.
There's also some like weird things in this chapter. Like it starts off with, we find out that there was a Dracone, is that how you pronounce that? Some sort of monster was outside the borders of the camp, and they kind of allude to it. I mean, the monster doesn't do anything because it doesn't get in. I guess it's sort of supposed to be like a metaphorical representation of how the monsters are encroaching on the camp and that Luke is going to try to get at them somehow.
I don't think that's actually the reason why they had the monster there. It's to establish the magical border, like no monsters can come in. Because we've already had that before with Sea of Monsters of the border weakening. But here it's kind of to establish that, you know, monsters can't get in unless there's like a back door, which would be the labyrinth to get in. That's kind of the main reason. It's
right, exactly. So it's like, hey, remember how we have a magical force field still working? It's still very important to the plot.
Yes, because that was the focal point of Sea of Monsters, is that the borders are weakening so monsters can come in. Here it's kind of to establish, oh, there is a completely different way to come in.
Yeah, because they have the fleece, and they also have a dragon. So there's, you know, they're fine as far as borders are concerned.
So, you know, there's great setup, and then obviously the payoff is at the end of this chapter, because you need to have those moments where you can set up, oh yeah, kids have to remember for some reason, because they're idiots, that, you know, there's a magical border that protects everything, except here we have the thing that actually kind of breaks the rules, which, again, it actually is established perfectly in this book series, where, like, the rules aren't necessarily broken, but they can be bent in a way that work with other mythology.
Right, there's a loophole about something that you didn't realize before. Like, it's not necessarily like you can't go under the force field barrier of the camp. It's just you can't go through it if you're a monster. So there's some sort of justification that does make sense, which I guess is like, that makes it more interesting, because honestly, you have to constantly put that safety border in peril in one way or another, or else it's like, okay, we're not under threat at all. Like, whether it be, oh, the Talia's tree was protecting us, and oh, now we need the magical fleece to protect us, or oh no, there's actually a vulnerability, we didn't even realize that even when the fleece is there, you could just completely circumvent this barrier. Like, there's a lot of different ways that it can be worked around.
See, that's the great thing I like about Rick Riordan's writing here, is that when he establishes rules, he certainly keeps them to the point of where if he wants to change something, it has to work within the confines of the rules. There are so many books that I have read previously where like they kind of scrub the rules. Great example of this is the Time Turner. The second you introduce the Time Turner in Harry Potter, you've kind of screwed over the entire universe by having time travel, and then kind of, you know, it's just a convenient plot device.
Oh yeah, it's like completely breaks the world. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, the world building is all consistent, actually. I mean, like that's the thing is like my complaint about this chapter doesn't have anything to do with the world building. It just has to do with me personally not enjoying the kinds of scenes where they're like doing some sort of camp activity. Like I don't find them it that engaging, especially when we already have the stakes of something like Luke and the Princess Andromeda and all of these people who are like following his weird quest to destroy Mount Olympus. Like all of that stuff is so much more pressing and important feeling that when they're doing this made up game where this guy released a bunch of monsters for the sake of them having a challenge, it just sort of doesn't matter as much. You know what I mean? Because like they've already fought actual monsters in the real world that weren't sort of in this controlled environment, so to speak.
See, here's the thing though. When it comes to these stories, like when you get to the fourth book of any book where there's supposed to be five, like you kind of can throw out some of the old timey normalcy that you're supposed to have. Because, we've already established, like, they do all these things. You can even have it implied within the fourth book. Like, oh, we did this training exercise. I did the whole volcano wall. We fought scorpions and I almost got stung. We've gotten to the point of the book where you can kind of, like, get rid of that almost because it's almost routine. Which, I get it that it's like in Harry Potter, we have the mystical thing of having, wizarding class. We have all these things about, like, spells and we have Quidditch and stuff, which, it's fine.
Right. I guess that's part of the reason why that's like a plot point, right? It's yeah, it's like what you said about Harry Potter. It's sort of like people who read Percy Jackson are like, "Oh, I want to go to Camp Half-Blood. I want to be a Half-Blood." So these scenes are meant to make you feel like, "Oh, I'm experiencing the activities of the camp." But it just sort of like doesn't matter as much once you
It deters kind of from the plot. Like,
yeah.
this is something that Joe Bob Briggs says, is that, the plot got in the way of the story. Where you have the plot here where it's like, oh, fun, wacky demigod adventures, but the real story is Luke and the Civil War that's kind of brewing. Like, that's the real story. Like, this is kind of, I guess, the wallpaper, and the wallpaper's kind of peeling off a little bit. You're like, oh, let's look underneath it. Oh, no, mold.
Well, also, it's kind of weird because I think they're trying to establish Quintus as like this wild card, kind of like you said, like a Remus Lupin character, like this new instructor who doesn't play by the rules that we're used to, and oh, he has released monsters.
Nah,
It's
man, like, he's like the hip teacher. He's the time that, like, he, like, flips his chair backwards, and, like, we're not gonna learn from the book.
but that doesn't really even make sense in this context because they're already fighting monsters, right? Like even Percy says in this chapter, the quest or the activity was straightforward enough. We'd all fought monsters before, so like, why is this any different other than the fact that in this weird scenario, for some reason, all three of these scorpions decide to descend on just Annabeth and Percy.
See, I think if they had the challenge differently, like you're learning a new thing, which, would come into play later, like he actually shackles Annabeth and Percy together, like there has to be something that actually adds a challenge, like they're blindfolded.
Right, like you need to show that he's unhinged or different in some way, because before it's just like, oh yeah, we're already fighting monsters.
Here, this will be the even better aspect of it. He's like, you have to fight them without your weapons. Like, you have to do something that's so nutso butso.
Or something, right? Like it wasn't raising the stakes at all. And I get that. I think that this was probably just sort of like a plot framework to give them an excuse to discover the entrance to the labyrinth. Like I understand that like, because would it have been less interesting if they were just wandering in the woods and they happened to find like this weird crack in this boulder that led to like a cave somewhere? Probably. So to add stakes to that, they have the scorpions.
So going through, like, the plots that are already going on, like, there's two ways of doing it. One is the traditional way they have it with Quintus, where they have a fight, and they get stuck in the boulders, or you have it so far with, like, the weird romantic stuff where Annabeth, like, kind of starts crying and runs off into the woods and then discovers said boulders. But I prefer this latter over the other one because at least there's some action and there's, like, that nice action beat that to a kid they get really invested in because action's cool. See, I've never found action cool in books. I've always found action cool in, like, TV shows and places that are more visual because you can actually see it with the stakes. Though that isn't to say that there aren't good books that have great action set pieces. Like if you read Brandon Sanderson, the way like he writes his action so like vivid and you can actually understand it, it's actually fun to read. While some books like kids books where you don't have enough luxury of having a huge word count, you can't really do that. It's more like Percy parried the scorpion. The scorpion tried to sting him. Percy didn't get stung.
It goes exactly the way you expect. The only foil to this very, like, expected, obvious fight that they have with the scorpions is, I guess, the fact that there's more than they expect. Like, oh no, there's 3. Yeah, another interesting thing I found about the weird scorpion battle or whatever is that the teams seem to be, like, really specifically picked to have some sort of character development happen. Like, I don't know why. I don't know who picked the teams. Was it Quintus?
It's not even that. Like, there aren't any, like, weird, wacky, like, different lineups. Like, here in the story, like, I pretty much, like, we have Beckendorf with Selena Beauregard. We have, the Stoll brothers together. We have Grover and Tyson, which is, I guess the only, like, which is the only toss-up of this is because they're not really demigods, but they're still going to fight anyways. And surprise, surprise.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how the rules work, where it's like, you fight too. Like, what makes someone count as a camper?
I think it would have been better. Once again, I've always been the person that's like have like interesting lineups. Like I liked when it was Percy and Clarice. Like that would have been a cool one to have. Or just have things that are just so different where like when you're fighting something, it makes more sense. But then again, once again, you have to like realize that for the plot of the story, Annabeth and Percy have to be together.
Right, because they have to know about the whole labyrinth thing, and it makes sense. Because otherwise, Percy would just still be stuck down there because she knows about the Mark of Daedalus and stuff. It's not only, like, interesting that Percy and Annabeth have to be paired together and the whole thing with the labyrinth and them figuring that out, and also the fact that, like, Annabeth for some reason still had some vague lingering resentment towards Percy, like, almost a full 3 chapters later. He's surprised that she sits with him, is like, oh, she's talking to me, and then he's kind of, like, relieved that she's nice to him again, and again, we've talked about how silly it would be for her to, like, even hold a grudge for more than, I don't know, 5 seconds, but it makes sense, like, oh, no, we have to put them back together. And then there's, like, this weird thing with Tyson and Grover where they have something against each other. Like, obviously, Grover has a thing against Cyclopses, which I guess this is, I don't know, did Annabeth pass on her Cyclops racism to him? Because, like, now he has, like, this weird PTSD about the Sea of Monsters sort of experience he had in that weird Cyclops cave.
But it's not like they've had character development before. Like, yes, Grover didn't go on the Sea of Monsters journey, but at least, like, if Percy thinks it's cool that Tyson's a Cyclops, I think Grover would also think it's cool that Tyson's a Cyclops.
But then a weird thing is Tyson also doesn't like Grover.
Again, this is what I said last chapter. It's like a lot of the character motivations kind of hit the reset button because you need to have that drama, which is stupid. There's no nice way of saying it.
Did Tyson always have a thing against Grover? I don't remember that being the case.
No, there was none. There was zero, zip, nada.
Yeah. It just seemed to come out of nowhere. Like, in the last chapter, I think he said something about how the goat boy scares him or something. And then in this chapter, too, it's, like, similar where they don't want to sit next to each other and they both seem to feel uncomfortable. And then when they're paired up for the, like, big monster fight thing, they both are really freaked out and keep pleading at Percy to, like, figure it out for them. And I kind of understand the Grover motivation a little bit, even though it's kind of silly that he would think that Tyson is any kind of threat. Like, he's literally the sweetest character in the entire book. And then I don't really know the motivation. Is that something they're going to be revealed later? Like, this just seems like a very strange, shoehorned in thing.
And here's my response. Potatoes.
So maybe they'll explain why he feels that way. But it's kind of funny that all of a sudden, like, he has a thing against him when they definitely had interacted before and they didn't have that same dynamic.
There are a lot of things in this chapter that just don't necessarily, like, add up right now. Maybe they're added later on. Maybe they're not really quite talked about. But for the most part, the characters are consistent. Like, when they get to the whole, like, they're sitting for dinner before the whole big games, like, I like those aspects of the story when they just sit down, they're talking. But then they added this weird rule set that I could not remember, but then, like, I guess they did talk about it in the first book where, you have to sit together.
I'm glad they explained that because I was legitimately confused. There was, like, a moment where it was just like, don't you care about the rules? And I'm like, did I skip a chapter? I'm confused. What rules? Oh, right. I guess you can't sit with someone who's not your cabin. That seems so silly.
I remember having this deja vu conversation with you about, like, oh, this is actually kind of worse than Harry Potter because at least in Harry Potter, those kids, can sit pretty much anywhere for the most part.
Can they, though? Or does he only sit with Gryffindor people? Oh no, he sits with like Luna and stuff too.
If you
Never
think about
mind.
like at lunch or like in breakfast, like they sit everywhere, but like this is like all the time, like you're kind of like isolated, which is a little stupid because when you're kids, like talk about like having like a god complex when you have like the big old
We've
house.
definitely had this conversation before. It's all flooding back to me now. Like when we first started The Lightning Thief, and it's described that Percy had to sit by himself.
Which it's kind of still silly at this point of having Percy kind of has to sit by himself, but he's kind of proven himself time and time again. Also, Dionysus isn't here, so you would imagine there'd be like total anarchy. Like this would maybe turn into like the Lord of the Flies situation, but all the kids are still like set in their rules and they understand like the old ancient rules.
I like how even Quintus, who doesn't seem to give a crap about the rules, still like raises an eyebrow, like, "Oh, what's going on here?" And then as Annabeth continues to talk to Percy, he kind of seems to get irritated, like, "Oh, you're pressing your luck, staying here for so long." And I just don't really get it. Like, it doesn't feel in character for these people to just. I get why do they care? Why do they care that these campers are sitting next to each other? Like, is there some sort of logic?
You want to know the reason for this be? Is because this is the plot convenience of they don't have enough time to talk about exposition. That is the exact reason.
It literally is. It's just another one of those sort of made up premises that makes it more difficult to communicate.
So here's like the plot structure for this. I wish I had like a board because I could actually explain this a little better. But you have the setup of talking about the labyrinth with here, but there isn't enough time. So when they accidentally fall into the labyrinth, it makes sense because it was set up earlier in this chapter about having the labyrinth and what it does and how it works.
And then they can continue their conversation. Though a surprising amount of exposition actually happens while they're supposedly really freaked out in the middle of the woods and being pursued by scorpions. Like, they literally like run into Juniper and they have like a whole conversation, and then she bursts into dust, and they're kind of like very casually talking about a lot of things, and Percy miraculously is able to get out the fact that he saw Nico.
Well, yeah, that's the whole like they're lost in the woods and they have nothing better to do than to talk, which once again it is a thing that's just a staple of Percy Jackson. If you're in the woods, it's like a low budget movie where if you don't have permits, you shoot in the woods and you make something in the woods. It's the exact same thing. You have to either have exposition or you need to have action when you're in the woods because anything can happen in the woods. But it's one of those hard things. Like, I wish that the book just kind of started and it's like, okay, we have to deal with the labyrinth, and then they go on their merry way. Because I guarantee you within the next 3 chapters, like, we sound like we're slamming the book, but like we just want things to happen so we can go back to kind of like talking about the cool little moments, because here it's just setting things up again, because they even do the same thing again, like you pointed out, like I didn't really think about,
Like the exposition thing, you mean?
yeah, they had the same exposition things where like, they were kind of like talking about other things, like they talk about blackjack, like, oh yeah, this is the horse that I saved.
Oh yeah, like as if we had forgotten since the last book. Like, hey, remember when he saved Blackjack from the Princess Andromeda and now he wants to help him all the time? Like, yes, this is a character we are familiar with. We have read the books. Give people some credit.
Like, I get the reason why that's there, like we've talked about this to death from the last episode about kids might not be the smartest, I guess. Like, I'm doing this with like a shrug right
That's
now.
not really true though, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
we've
like I
talked
said,
about this.
I'm doing this with a shrug. Like, it's one of those things that happens, but like once the adventure starts, that's when Rick Riordan gets his feet almost. This is where it becomes more exciting. This is where it becomes more dynamic. But here we're just going through plot A to plot B.
Oh, I want them to finally get into the freaking labyrinth already. I mean, they kind of technically did.
Everything about this book is about the labyrinth, to the point of where Grover's mission is to go into the labyrinth. Like, that's the whole thing.
Oh, so do you want to briefly talk about the importance of the labyrinth? Because we kind of didn't really go into that.
Yeah, so we can talk about the labyrinth right now.
Yeah, so it's designed by Daedalus, which he's like an ancient architect, basically, that Annabeth is obsessed with, which makes sense considering her whole obsession with architecture in general. Yeah, this is when we find out the whole spooky thing with Clarice and with Annabeth actually had a lot to do with what Clarice's secret mission was in the last book, which we weren't allowed to find out about. And now we know that it had to do with her doing like a sort of, I guess, reconnaissance mission, figuring out what the heck is going on with the labyrinth.
See, this is where I wish there were just short stories like about like small branching off things, but that's just me.
Right, like that explained the in-between stuff that we missed that we just learned later, you mean?
there are Percy Jackson short stories that Rick Riordan has written. I don't know if one of them is like this in between with like Clarice and Chris, but that would be such a great little short story to have. Like, just have like the in between. That's why I keep bringing up Brandon Sanderson, but in his Stormlight archive, like there's the main book, but as you're reading it, there's like interludes, which are like mini short stories that kind of explain the world because the whole world's huge. And I wish they were like little interludes.
Yeah, I do think that this would make a funny short story just because imagining Clarice interacting with Chris Rodriguez, who I'm actually very glad that they did the whole exposition thing in this case because I totally forgot who he was. He has a pretty forgettable name.
That's the only time where it's appropriate because it's one of those things like, wait, who is this kid? And then you remember from Sea of Monsters because it's one of those things where it's just like a hi bye type of friend. Like it's like, oh, hi, Chris. Bye, Chris.
Yeah, it's not very established. So he's babbling in the middle of the desert when she finds him.
Yes, once again, this would have made for a great short story. It's almost like the teen romance.
We get the summation of what happens, but we don't get, like, the dialogue of Clarice being like, what are you talking about? Because you know that she has no patience for people, so imagining her...
This is just me. It's like one of those weird teen romance stories where one person's crazy talking about string, and then you have the other person who's just super aggressive. Is like, here comes the airplane, and she's like nursing him back to health.
But she's like mad about it. Yeah, that would honestly be really funny. We find all of this out via Annabeth's little foray at the Poseidon table, even though she's not supposed to because of dumb camp rules, whatever.
Well, no, this is just Rick Riordan. We need to have the stakes risen higher. Legitimately, they was steak night that night, too, so I guess the stakes were quite high.
It's true. Well, actually, isn't, what's his name, Quintus eating his food with, like, a dagger? He's, like, cutting sausage with a dagger.
Well, see, once again, if you want to have, like, a gritty character, you make them, like, really, like, disgusting. Like, they drink their grog, burp, and they eat with, like, just a knife. Like, that's how you want to have, like, your real, like, roguish type of person that isn't Han Solo.
So anyway, Chris Rodriguez, a.k.a. boy with the most forgettable name and personality, becomes even more forgettable because he loses his mind.
Yes, which, when you go into a maze, you kind of go, like, a little crazy because, things happen. Like, I guess this is, like, the perfect example is Labyrinth from David Bowie. Because, that maze is designed to be so, like, insane that you would probably go nutso-butso.
Or tricky in some way. Yeah. I find stories like that really upsetting, actually. That is why I found Goblet of Fire really creepy. That's why I found just really any story that has characters trapped in some sort of way, and then they could sort of get confused. It's not actually too dissimilar from the Lotus Hotel, too, though that's different because it's sort of more luring you in with something positive, but it's like a similar idea of, like, nobody ever goes in and nobody ever comes out, like the sort of Willy Wonka mode.
Isn't that right, man? That has a bunch of butcher cleavers. I just love that aspect of Willy Wonka where that crazy guy that's explaining all the exposition just has like a bunch of like knives and stuff. He's just like the local butcher that has like a mobile cart.
It's like, what's that guy? What's that guy's story?
I was a candy maker once. I hunted the Oompa Loompas.
I once was an Oompa Loompa and then I grew out of it.
Oh no. Oh man, that's terrible. Actually, he's secretly Willy Wonka's brother. He's Butcher Wonka. It's Charlie in the Meat Factory.
Okay, this is getting too dark even for me.
This is the horror movie version. Then again, Willy Wonka already is a horror movie with like...
Oh, absolutely. Most Roald Dahl books are just horror movies. They're just, couched in whimsy.
You could just stuff those pages into a film camera and just add like creepy music to them, and it becomes a slasher movie.
I think most comedies can be tragedies with just different music. Have you ever seen that Mrs. Doubtfire trailer that someone edited?
Doubtfire one? Yes!
Yes, so
that was so great.
Especially when it just like it plays like that spooky music and it pans over to him and he's standing in the window.
Oh yeah, and then he like walks away. It's so great.
Really funny. I feel like we should like post that in the show notes because that's like
Oh, that one is we watched that in film class one time like years ago about like tone. Because in this book, actually, with Battle of Labyrinth, there's a lot of tonal issues with it because it's sometimes supposed to be horrific, like people going insane, people like just killing themselves, and then there's like playing for laughs. Like, well, I mean, if you're going into like a maze, you might go insane, but like there's just weird tonal shifts that Percy Jackson's supposed to be more comedic, but now we're getting into the more darker stuff. So it's like the balance between being horrific and being funny.
I guess that makes sense though, because we've talked about this too, how kids books they kind of have to follow the pattern of like we're getting more gritty as we go along because our like reader base is aging with the story, so we kind of have to get grittier to hold their attention kind of thing. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why that happens. Also, just in general, that characters are getting older, so they're facing greater threats and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but again, when it comes to tone, like Percy Jackson, once again, we can look at the chapter titles. I accidentally vaporized my algebra teacher. Like, it's supposed to be a goofy-ish story. Like, I get, like, you can have adult elements, but you've already established that the series is supposed to be more comedic.
Do you think that they play Chris Rodriguez? I almost forgot his name again because he's so forgettable. Do you think that they play him going crazy for laughs? Because they kind of do, because he does go, "What is this about Clarice and a crazy guy or whatever?"
We haven't met the man yet, so you don't know if it's played for laughs. We just know how Percy Jackson...
Well, didn't we meet him on the Princess Andromeda for a second?
Yes, B, we did meet him at the Princess Andromeda, but we haven't met him, crazy.
Oh, that's true.
We don't know if it's being played for laughs because we're coming from the perspective of Percy, who always treats everything as a joke. We don't treat reality as a thing yet because, again, this book series is written from Percy's perspective. I'll say this, like, when it comes to things that are, like, terrifying and horrifying and sad, Rick Riordan doesn't necessarily play it for jokes because there's scenes, like, when... like Zoe's dying, like that isn't played for a joke whatsoever. Like there's actually like serious moments. It's not one of those things where I look at this crazy guy, it's funny because he's crazy. It's more like we'll probably see him or we'll have like some prospects of where's the string? Like like Percy's like rustling him.
Oh, right. So yeah, he was babbling about string because he's talking about, okay, how do you say her name? Ariadne or something. Her string is what originally led people out of this labyrinth, and it's kind of like the only way you can escape because it's intentionally designed to confuse you, to baffle you, to trick you in some way. It knows all your weaknesses, it knows all your wants, all that kind of stuff.
Jesus, it sounds like my ex-girlfriend.
I mean, it's like that typical kind of fantasy setting of like, oh, it plays to your greatest weaknesses. It's like the poppies will put them to sleep. The Lotus Hotel will trick you into staying there for years. Like it sort of plays on the idea that everybody has their own specific fatal flaw. So I think we're going to maybe see more of that in the chapters to come of like the different ways in which certain characters can be tricked based on, say, their belief like in themselves, like in Annabeth's case, like her hubris, or in the case of Percy, he's so loyal. Like these are the things that we've learned are like fatal flaws to them.
I'm just like imagining they like go into a room that's just slightly dirty and Annabeth kind of starts freaking out.
Would that be Annabeth or would that be what's her name? Selena Beauregard.
Well, that would also be Selena, but she's not going on this mission, I don't think. But that would be so funny. It's just like...
No, yeah, she's too busy just being uptight, like checking out the cabins.
No, if it was Selena, what they would do is they'd put her in a room filled with mirrors, and like each mirror would see like some weird imperfection on her face or something, and she would just start freaking out until she's like a spooky skeleton in the mirrors.
But yeah, so the reason that Chris What's-His-Face goes crazy is because that's just the way that the labyrinth works. It kind of drives you nutty as you're trying to figure it out. And obviously we realized because he was working with Luke, we saw him in Princess Andromeda, that he was scouting out the labyrinth for Luke, trying to figure out how it works, because the great big conclusion of all of this is that Luke is probably trying to figure out how the labyrinth works so that way they can break into camp via this secret tunnel system that spans basically all of America.
It's real like the invasion of Normandy. It's just like getting off the small little hole and just having like an entire like invasion happening, which is really scary because obviously because it's magic, they can't just blow it up with old timey TNT. It'll just probably move or do something that's indestructible.
Yeah. I did feel a little bit bad for Percy when he's like, oh, I finally figured it out. It's moved because everything in ancient Greece moved to the Western civilization, so it's probably under an important American building. And then Annabeth is like, close but no cigar, you moron. It actually couldn't be under one building because it's gigantic. It's under, like, all of America. And he's like, oh, of course, I almost figured it out. And I felt kind of bad because he did. This is, like, one of the few examples of Percy, like, actually, I don't know, puzzling something together and figuring it out himself. Like, oh, yeah. He even like makes fun of himself. He's like, you'd think after a few years I'd finally like get what was going on, and then he's kind of like patting himself on the back, and she's like, oh, not too soon. It's actually you're totally wrong. It wouldn't be under one building, and he kind of feels like a dum dum.
I'm actually thinking of like Jimmy Neutron with like the brain blast, except when you go into Percy's brain, just actual seaweed. Like, oh yeah.
Yeah, literally. I mean, she makes fun of him a lot for being not that bright, which I mean is kind of fair. He isn't all that great at figuring things out. Maybe again, if he studied his myths more.
Well, you see, B, if we're going off D&D logic, he put all of his stats into strength and charisma and not intelligence.
Uh-huh. Oh, absolutely. That's definitely Percy's makeup right there.
One of my favorite things ever in any video game is in Fallout New Vegas. Like, the whole premise of the game, you start and you get shot in the face, and you wake up and this doctor saves yourself. But if you put low intelligence, like when you're talking to people in the game, like you sound like a complete moron. Like everything has like a grammatical error, and you can't pass anything. It's so great. I'm just imagining that for Percy.
Yeah, I mean, he's street smart, sort of. He's just not that great at sort of figuring out logic sometimes. And so I did feel a little bit bad that, oh, finally he had his moment to shine and figure this out. And then Annabeth kind of stepped on his dreams. So yeah, the labyrinth is obviously going to be a really big plot point in this book, if only for the reason that it's literally in the title. But not only does this have to do with like Luke's spooky plans to like get into the camp, and then so far only Clarice was able to find the closest entrance to the labyrinth was in Manhattan, so that doesn't make sense. Like, oh, how would he get into camp? Obviously, we find out that that's not necessarily the only entrance near them.
It's almost like, can things get any worse? Boo!
Yeah. Also, important aspect of the labyrinth is that it's like underground and difficult to navigate, so it would make perfect sense that that's where Pan is, so that's why all this time Grover has been having a hard time finding Pan because he's not actually where he's looking. And then, oh, it makes sense. Like, oh, satyrs don't like to go underground because it's dark and it's damp and there are no flowers and trees.
Here's my plot hole with this. You would think that satyrs would probably want to do something like this in the thousands and thousands of years of looking for him. Like, you would think one person would have the idea, hey, we have this mystical, like, labyrinth, which, once again, they've established it takes you to your heart's desire, like the compass in Pirates of the Caribbean that points always to where you need to go. It's like, hey, why don't we just do this? Why don't we have like a whole party that goes underneath the ground, which I understand like they're all afraid of going underground, but if you're looking for your god, you would imagine some people would have like a mini crusade.
Yeah, I guess. Is it been established that like most satyrs are kind of cowardly though, like because Grover kind of is a little bit, and then even the council of elders, they seemed a little bit like lackadaisical and like not super like dedicated to put like sticking their neck out or doing anything too life threatening. So I don't know exactly if that's just like a specific Grover thing or just like a general thing.
So I think being a scaredy cat is more of a Grover thing, but being just inept is just a regular satyr thing.
Okay, so yeah, their ineptness then is pretty on brand.
That's the whole conversation with Annabeth talking to Percy at the table. It's like, hey, you have to convince him.
Even after he finds out that Pan might be there, and all he wants to do is find Pan, he still doesn't want to go. So like that kind of speaks to why it hasn't happened yet. It's because he's afraid.
Yeah, he's like the Shaggy of the group.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, so anyway, we're really lucky that Annabeth is the genius to Percy's idiocy, because they do fall down into the labyrinth pretty shortly after they kind of establish that it's a thing to begin with.
And it's like, Annabeth's like, don't make a step, because she does the most logical thing, like, we have to go back the exact same way we came. We can't really alter anything. Don't even step the wrong way. And they kind of figure out, like, how to get past, like, how they fell in, which is ingenious, because, again, Percy would have done the thing of, like, going forward.
Percy would have just kept walking in one direction, because he's not the brightest boy in the world.
And then they would cut to Percy, and he's like, what is this? And he sees, like, a little light pole, like a gas lamp. Oh, no, I'm in the wrong book. Tilda Swinton, what are you doing here?
Yeah, it just really worked out that Annabeth, who knows a lot about Daedalus, knows somewhat about the labyrinth. Again, she's been doing some research because she's been helping Clarice out. And obviously she knows a lot about architecture, so she puts her hand against the wall and finds the mark of Daedalus, and then I like how Percy's like, she said that to me as if that was supposed to mean something or make sense or whatever, because like, once again, he's baffled, as he always is, he's baffled, but she presses the thing or like puts her hand on it, and then the hole where they fell through opens up again because before it was just like this sealed off piece of rock and they were completely abandoned. And then they appear out again, and like I said, it's like the Narnia thing where they're like, we were only gone for a few minutes, and then they're like, you were gone for a whole hour.
Yes, which opens up a new can of worms because if they're gonna go into the labyrinth, time works differently. So like they come out in the years like 3000.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting plays on time in these books, and I guess that makes sense because Kronos is one of the main villains. But there's like the example of someone like Zoe who doesn't age at a normal rate, or someone like Talia who is sort of like frozen in time, like she's not the same age that she should be, and or same thing with the with Nico and Bianca, that they were like trapped in the Lotus Hotel.
See, this is also like a convenient plot device because once again, there's always a thing about the ticking clock. So when you go into a place that like messes with time, it just increases the stakes because they'll have less time to do said things because you need to be like very proactive, which happens here because the whole process of this book series is dealing with time. Like when a demigod gets to the age of 16, something bad's gonna happen. So let's go into the spooky dooky labyrinth that might age you horribly.
Yeah, there's a lot of examples of that. I really do think that the Lotus Hotel feels like a similar sort of magic in a way because they even have like a very similar scene where they get out of there and then they go, how long has it been? Like they keep running into people who don't understand how long they've been there and that kind of thing. It's a very spooky concept.
Pretty much, the whole Chekhov's gun of this is that there's a special string that Luke might be looking for. So now it's going to be a race against time to see who gets the special string. It's a real Blue's Clues situation here.
Yeah, well, it's not just any special string. It's a special string that is basically the only way to figure out how to navigate the labyrinth, or else you're basically definitely gonna die.
When I think of like invisible special string, I'm thinking of like those invisible dog collars. Like you have like you're walking your invisible dog.
You just like hit into a barrier and you're like, oh.
It's like the string's alive. What is it, boy? Ruff, ruff. You like follow the string.
Yeah, so basically them finding this entrance in a very convenient way
that they can't get rid of
answers all of the questions that were raised earlier in the chapter about why would Luke be trying to navigate the labyrinth if there isn't an entrance within the borders of Camp Half-Blood. Well, there is now. They know for sure there is one, and they're kind of gonna die if they don't figure out a way to, I guess, seal it. I don't exactly know how they're gonna fix this. They gotta go and battle in the labyrinth, for the labyrinth, not entirely sure.
They have to go fight David Bowie, pretty much.
Yep, exactly.
That's pretty much the whole story. They have to get the string, save the girl, and get from Shell City. I do like the ending of this where they do have the stakes. I really do enjoy the interaction they have with Annabeth and Percy, because once again, when they shine is when they're at their best, which is Annabeth's doing all the logical thinking while Percy's being kind of like the bumbling sidekick almost.
Yeah, and Percy's a babbling moron.
And that's what really works about this, especially like, once they go up top, they have the same type of status quo. Clarice is the one that won the challenge because, she's the one that's like brute force. Now the stage is set. Who's going to be on this character lineup? I don't know. I have my ideas because it's been a while, but I do know. B, who do you think is going to be going on this quest?
Well, obviously Clarice and Annabeth and Percy, and probably Grover, even though he doesn't want to, and even though that his girlfriend nymph character doesn't want him to go underground because she's concerned for him. Yeah, so probably the old gang. Everyone's there. Quintus? Would Quintus go? I don't know. I mean, it's I don't think he would. It's just always really funny when they like introduce a new character and then you don't see much of them because then they're like going to be in the labyrinth, so they won't see much of him. I don't really know how he's going to factor into the plot. Would Tyson come with them? I'm not sure. I don't know why he would.
It's one of those weird, wacky, mystical things where it's, it's supposed to be the power of 3, but how many people can you stack on a team when one of them has to be Percy and one of them has to be Annabeth? Because you wouldn't have a story without them.
I definitely think Clarice is going to have to be with them, probably, because she was the person who investigated the labyrinth to begin with. But, and also Grover for sure, because he needs to find Pan, so.
They're getting the old gang back together, like old times.
Mm-hmm. Oh, not to mention that they need to figure out the whole Nico thing, because after all of that stuff with the labyrinth, or right before rather, Percy admits the whole thing about the iris message, that he doesn't know where it came from, but he knows that that Nico's in the underworld with a spooky ghost giving him bad advice.
Yeah, because ghosts do give the best advice, you know.
Yeah, they actually specifically give the worst advice. That's what Annabeth says, that they have old grudges.
Usually those agendas are also color-coded and they have like these nice little like highlights, but...
No, but all of his agendas are like black and gray because he's so emo.
Oh no, they're like Dashboard Confessional, they're like Panic at the Disco, they're like My Chemical Romance binders. Like, for some reason I'm about to say Trapper Keepers, but no one's had a Trapper Keeper since the 90s.
I was like, yeah, Trapper Keepers are... Those don't really fit time period wise.
Well, he's also a person out of time, so all he has is like his book bag and then like a belt to hold all his books together because they don't have backpacks yet. The ghost is telling him to buy war bonds and to drink his Ovaltine. Man, I'm really getting out of this time zone right now.
Yeah, we're kind of veering anyway. So yeah, that's like sort of how the chapter ends, basically, as we find out this is what Luke is planning all along.
Yes, and that's kind of the scary bit of it, is we don't know what's going to be happening. Is this how Luke's going to get his evil plans? Is this how they're going to have all their confrontations? Which, you know, this does set up one of the coolest things about this book, is that there might be teleportation in this, because that means they can pop up anywhere in the labyrinth, meaning they could end up like in Boise, Idaho, they can end up in Wichita, Kansas, they can end up pretty much anywhere.
Right, it just like, it lets out in weird random places.
Now I want a set piece of them in the Mall of America. So B, what is the name of the next chapter?
Wow, this is a surprising one. Chapter 4 is called Annabeth Breaks the Rules. When has she ever
Oh my
broken
god,
the
she
rules?
breaks the rules?
I mean, she just broke the rules last chapter, actually, because she sat with Percy.
Man, she's bad to the bone.
Oh, man, I don't know what rules she's gonna break. What rules are there? I feel like she's just gonna, like, hop into the labyrinth against everyone's will, and she's like, I'm gonna go and figure it out.
Oh, she's gonna do the old Annabeth 1-2 skidoo and just hop in there and go in her own merry way?
The blue skidoo weekend, too. Burr, 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 burr. I don't really have a lot of predictions about the next chapter, because I mean, like, general stuff, like, obviously they're gonna have to deal with the labyrinth now, and they have to go on a quest. Are they gonna just hop right into it and go on a quest? Are they gonna convince Grover? Not sure. I mean, they're gonna have to, probably, for plot reasons.
If we're following the same cliches like the last books, what ends up happening is Chiron's like, you shouldn't go into that quest, but we're gonna do it anyways, and all of a sudden they get a spooky prophecy like they've gotten through all the other books. And then they still decide to go on the quest, and they probably get help from somebody in the beginning, and that's how they go on the quest, and then things start to deter and break down as the quest goes on, to the point of where they're minutes away from failing.
Yeah, I don't really know much beyond that. There's a lot of, like, loose threads we need to follow up, but I don't necessarily know how much we're going to get into that in the next chapter.
Well, we'll find out next week. Same Half-Blood time, same Half-Blood channel. So, B, did we get any messages this week?
Oh, we sure did. Oh god, I think the first one is a meme.
It might be. It looks like Steve Harvey.
It does look like Steve Harvey. It's kind of hard to look anything... Like, I'm pretty sure Steve Harvey has a distinct face. Like, either that's Steve Harvey or Mr. Potato Head came to life. Yes!
Well, it's Mr. Potato Head in, like,
just
4K.
fell off because I laughed too hard. Oh my god, okay.
Yeah, no, B, it's Mr. Potato Head in 4K. It's a live action... It's a live action Toy Story. So what does the email say?
It says, this is Alex checking in again, but this time it's just a meme for your viewing pleasure. And it's a crying Steve Harvey that says, when you were the goddess of the moon for thousands of years, but the expedition to the moon was named after your brother. I guess Apollo, I imagine. Because Artemis is the goddess of the moon. Yeah, that makes sense. Also just wanted to know if either of y'all had read the Silverwing books. Thanks again for the content that my grandchildren will be subscribed to. Will there be podcasts by then? Who knows?
Those will be directly streamed into your brain. I'm just imagining like an old-timey person just like sitting in a rocking chair. Kids, did you listen to your radio camp Half-Blood this week? Yeah, we're on to episode 1615.
Yeah, I really do think the show changed a lot when B was replaced by Ascension AI.
It's just like two like Microsoft speak and talks. Hello, I am Zach. Hello, I am B.
I feel like this is just the premise of Mystery Science Theater, though.
Well, okay, if my life was like Mystery Science Theater, you don't know how happy I would be. If I had like the opportunity to like
That's
be
true.
a
That's
host
kind
for
of
Mystery Science
inevitable.
Theater, I would like rip off my clothes right now, and underneath would be a jumpsuit already. I'm ready to go.
You're ready. Anyway, I've not read the Silverwing books. I actually don't read a ton of like that sounds like YA fantasy to me just by the name, but I'm not sure. I know nothing about it. But I don't normally read a ton of fantasy.
I got confused with another book series. I think it's called like the Wingfire series. I think it's a
Yeah, those
dragon
all sound
series.
about right, don't they?
To tell you the truth, I haven't even heard of it, so I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I just looked it up and it's Buck Wild.
Okay, what's it about?
First of all, it follows a young bat. A bat is a main character. It says
Okay.
the prologue is the great war between the birds and the beasts happened approximately 65,000 million years after the extinction of the dinosaurs for dominance over the land and sky. The bats, however, seeing themselves as neither birds nor beasts, remained neutral throughout the conflict. Finally, a compromise was reached. The birds would control the sky, while the beasts would claim the land. However, because the bats refused to take sides, they were banished from being allowed to fly during the day, not even allowed to so much as look at the sun ever again, only emerging at night. The war is based on Aesop's fables called The Birds, the Beasts, and the Bat. Whoa, okay. That's insane.
Holy Poseidon Bee, this sounds like fairy Lord of the Rings.
This sounds like way more unique than what I expected, honestly.
It sounds like a crazy person wrote this book series very quickly and is very proud of themselves, which isn't a bad thing to say.
I kind of want to read it now.
Maybe. But thank you so much for that lovely email, Alex. We really appreciate it. So we have an email from Maddie. Hi, Zack and B. You said you're fine with long emails, and I'm about to write a book in an email form. Here we go. You mentioned in the last episode that you guys were a bit annoyed with Annabeth because she was being so petty and jealous. I think this is due to the fact that Riordan is more likely a detailed outliner. Oh, so I think we talked about this.
We did, yeah.
Yeah. He plans out every detail of his books, and I think this sometimes leads to characters doing things that don't feel organic and just exist to drive the plot. It also doesn't help that Riordan really only does know how to write 3 protagonists. If you ever read Heroes of Olympus series, you know what I'm talking about. With 7 different main characters, it really does stand out that half of them have the same personalities.
I mean, I wouldn't know because I haven't read them, but that's interesting.
I haven't read Heroes of Olympus in a long time. I can kind of remember some characteristics, but not that much. But yeah, I can see that, especially like when you're an outliner, like you might want to write things, but like organically as your characters progress through like natural progression of the other books, like you can tell when something's a little off from outliners compared to people that are more like, gardeners. Like you write something and you kind of let them tell. It's like the cliche thing of like, let's let my characters tell the story. But some people do that. Some people do outlining.
Right, like I don't write down what happens to the characters tell me what's going to happen like that. It doesn't strike me that Rick is that kind of person. He's more like, oh, well, here's what the plot needs to do.
Well, also when you're writing a book about mythology, it more benefits to be an outliner because you can go like super crazy because mythology becomes so crazy that you need to have some type of structure or it doesn't work. Or you're just going to have ramblings of a crazy person. To continue, Rachel Elizabeth Dare, Red, is my favorite character in all of Percy Jackson. Though Nico is close second, Red is my first mortal character we've really got, and it's cool to see how mortal girls interact with demigods. She goes with the flow and asks a lot of questions and doesn't take no for an answer. Also, I always love redheads.
Yeah, that's a little
I have
interesting.
no comment about that.
I like her well enough as a character.
There's nothing wrong with like liking characters based on their hair color.
Carmelita Spatz is also a redhead, and I hate her. I actually would like to see them
eat vampire bats.
interact because I feel like that would be very funny.
Well, let's see all the redheads that I like in books. Let's see, we have Barb from Stranger Things, even though she isn't really a main character. She's a redhead. Got Red, Rachel Elizabeth Dare. Then we have Red the Pirate from Pirates of the Caribbean. Okay. Well, then there's also like, if you go by like characters' hair color, like you're gonna have a mad time now with all the characters having like pink, blue, green hair. Like one of my favorite things is like spotting the main character of an anime because they always have like crazy hair colors compared to everyone else.
Oh yeah, well that's like a running joke.
So chapter 3, I don't know much about Empanada's impetus or impetus. Oh, that's not the right word.
Empusas.
Impusas, thank you. So Impusas, but I don't have to Google, and I found interesting stuff. Apparently, Empanada's weakness is mean girl talk. If you insult them, they will run away shrieking. This is amazing. Oh, so you have to like bully them to defeat them. Oh man.
Oh, that's really funny. That kind of makes sense why they were bullies in that scene.
And lastly, a little factoid because I have literally nowhere else to share this. So Pan is pretty much a mysterious figure in Greek mythology. We don't know much about him, even his parents, which takes a really long time to drift, but there actually is a widely accepted theory why this is. People have speculated that Hermes and Pan used to be the same deity. Hermes Pan would have been the god of roads and traveling as well as nature, but the theory is that the roads and travelers stuff got separated into entirely different gods altogether. Hermes, and this led to Pan going significantly reduced. There is tons of evidence of this both. Hermes and Pan have their center of worship in Arcadia. There is also a god called I want to say Pusheen, but that's not right. It's Pushin.
That's the cat, but okay.
Well, you can worship Pusheen. It's okay.
I do, that's for sure, at the altar of the kittens.
Who is a god of roads and traveling, as well as nature, who is derived from the same older deity as Pan. Hermes also has the same associations with heading, just like Pan. Just a cool fact I thought I'd like to share. Keep staying mortal. Thanks, Maddie.
People know so much more about mythology compared to me. It's kind of embarrassing.
And me as well, but then again, like, I'd know different types of mythology. Like, I can tell you a lot about Westeros, and I can tell you about all the deities and all that stuff. I can tell you a lot about, like, Lord of the Rings.
That's true. I feel like maybe after we finish
Percy Jackson, we should take a mythology lesson at our local community colleges.
Yes, it's gonna take a little while. Maybe we could like have like a special episode where we like look up a couple like things like the Empusas. We could look up the chimeras, different things that you see featured in the Percy Jackson series, and like talk about a little bit about how they're adapted and things like that. That could be an interesting episode. Maybe a Patreon episode. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe a Patreon episode. That's all in the works. Well, it's all laissez-faire at this point, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, we got another email that says, "Hello, sorry if I butcher your name. I think it's Fenton. I'm
Danny
sorry.
Fenton?
Yeah,
Danny
he was just 16.
His parents built a very strange machine.
Okay, we can't do this whole song. We'll get copyright flagged by Butch Hartman. Hello, my name is Fenton. I'm 16 years old. I really love your podcast and listen to it all the time. You discuss celestial bronze guns. They do exist in Heroes of Olympus. When Piper chooses her weapon, she is offered a gun modified to shoot celestial bronze, but as you say, it would not be nearly as fun with guns. Zach, do you enjoy Percy Jackson's more first-person writing or Heroes of Olympus's third-person writing style? I have read lots of books of all different genres, and what books do you suggest? Because I have run out of books to read. Also, what other YA have you guys read? My personal favorites are Percy Jackson, Skullduggery, Pleasant, and Ranger's Apprentice. What's yours? Sorry for the long email, Fenton.
Ooh, to answer that question about do I like first-person Percy Jackson or third-person Heroes of Olympus, the problem, though, is Percy Jackson's very ambiguous. Like, we've had a conversation about, like, is it first-person? Is it, like, third-person at times?
We determined this, I think, at one point. I have a lit degree, and I don't remember what we determined.
But there's certain books that I like where they start off as first person and kind of go into third person. Though with Percy Jackson, I honestly prefer first person books a little more. Though if they're like heavy on like detail and they have multiple characters, it should always be in third person to an extent. Because when you have so many characters, like I'm looking at this from like Game of Thrones, it's better having it like in a third person aspect. To an extent, because you'll go crazy if you think of it in a first-person perspective.
I can't really think of a lot of series I've read. It's funny because even though that I do a Percy Jackson podcast and an Unfortunate Events podcast, like those are kind of outliers as far as books that I've read. I don't normally read a lot of series in general, or even YA for that matter. I did read The Hunger Games. That was a while ago. I mean, I always recommend Unfortunate Events if you haven't read it. If you like Percy Jackson, you probably like that. Like they're not dissimilar.
They're cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, they're from around the same time. There's like a similar sort of thing of like young people banding together to figure something out. The tone is a little bit different because I think Percy Jackson is way more action heavy, for sure. But again, I don't read a lot of action books either, for that
Like
matter.
for YA, it's a little tricky because YA always changes all the time. Like I'd recommend the Fear Street series by R.L. Stein because they're not necessarily connected. Yes, they're connected in a town, but like they're just fun little romps you can read. Like he just put out a new one called The Return of Fear Street. Yeah, they're one off, but they're also like a series. Ooh, Holes. We did Holes, and I thought that was a really good YA book.
Holes was good. Yeah, I really liked rereading that actually. That was good. Or actually, no, I don't think I read it when I was a kid. I think I'd only seen the movie.
It's hard to give YA because like B, I don't necessarily read YA all that much anymore. Like I read pretty much anything. Like last week I was just plowing through some Goosebumps books that I haven't had a chance to read. This week I'm reading a book series that I always get the name of it wrong. It's like the Code Alexis series, which is do you want to hear the premise of this book series, B?
What's the premise of this book series?
So this is written by Jim Butcher, and he was told on the internet by someone that you can have stupidest ideas and you can't make a good book. Jim Butcher was like, "No, I don't believe that. Give me your two stupidest ideas." So he was like, "Okay, wise guy, here are my two stupidest ideas: Pokemon and ancient Rome. Go make a book." He made a whole book series based off of Pokemon and ancient Rome. Talk about like being super petty but making millions of dollars.
I mean, hey, that's the best way to be petty, I think, is to make millions of dollars. Honestly.
But for me, when it comes to book recommendations, if you like a book that plays around with like viewpoints, The Name of the Wind, it has both third person elements and first person, which are truly the best type of transitions you'll ever have in a book series. And you can read that book dozens of times and find something new about it. I always recommend that. I recommend the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch. That's another good. I like fantasy, so that's kind of what I like to enjoy to read.
Yeah, I feel like I like more character driven stories. I think listening to SSR, I mean, we've talked about this podcast before, has really gotten me to think about some of the young adult books that I read as a kid. Charlotte's Web was kind of more of a children's book, but that was like just such a great classic. I listened to that episode pretty recently. That was really good. Like the Boxcar Children series is like weirdly dark and not the way I remembered necessarily.
Nancy
I'm
Drew.
trying to think what else is there. I actually didn't really read Nancy Drew. But actually right now I'm reading Anne of Green Gables because I watched the TV show on Netflix, which I love, and I like fell in love with the characters. And I thought that the portrayal of Anne was actually pretty spot on with the books because since reading the first installment, it's pretty similar characterization wise. And I find her to be a very interesting example of like a young, strong female character.
But that's pretty much it. I think I don't have any other books to
Oh,
really
so that's all the
recommend.
messages we got?
Yes, that is all the messages we got, and we didn't get any iTunes reviews this week, so that's okay. You know, people are busy, and people are always discovering our show, which is totally fine. So, B, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at bkellygorman, as well as Instagram at bkellygorman, and you can find me on Tumblr at twinpoetry.tumblr.com.
If you want to find me on Twitter, you can find me at Suda41. That's SUDA41. If you want to follow our show on Twitter, that's at halfblood_radio. If you want to email the show and send us any more Iris messages, you can email us at radiocamphalfblood@gmail.com. You can also listen to my new show, The Film Cultist, where I talk about movies. This week, I talked about Goosebumps from 2015. See if I liked it. See if I hated it. You'll find out.
And I think I'm gonna go on that show pretty soon. We're brainstorming.
It's either between like a Horse Girl movie or a Disney Channel original movie that we've talked about constantly on this show.
Oh yeah. So one of those. Either way, it's going to be pretty relevant to some of the discussions we've had on here. Not Halloween Town, unfortunately. We might save that for Halloween. We'll see.
Oh no, I gotta wait for Sarah for that. Like there's like some special conversations we're gonna have to have.
The special conversations about Gwen the town harlot.
It's terrible. There's nothing worse to have two ratty 20-somethings complaining about a movie when you've had too much funny juice.
Yeah. No, that was honestly really hilarious. I think that's everything.
Well, I'm Zach.
I'm B.
And keep staying mortal. Bye.
Bye, guys.